The whispers of Bartolomeo. Salty spume lashed Mateo's face as he flung his net wide, the practiced motion a solace against the encroaching gloom before dawn that he spat a curse at the restless waves, a ward against the rumors that clung to Cartagena like tenacious seaweed. Bloody Bartolomeo. A phantom name, whispered to frightened children and traded by gossiping crones. Bah, he grumbled, struggling with a stingy haul of snapper. More likely to find a mermaid braiding seaweed than that old devil resurfacing. His grandfather, God rest his soul, had been consumed by Bartolomeo, endlessly tracing faded charts, his gaze alight with obsessive avarice, convinced the pirates' hoard lay hidden somewhere along this very coast. Mateo had always dismissed it as a symptom of encroaching age, preferring the solid heft of fish to the insubstantial glint of fool's gold. The sun, a freshly minted coin, finally crested the horizon, splashing the sky with vibrant hues. Mateo commenced his homeward journey, the keen tang of salt and drying kelp sharp in the air. Rounding Punta Canoes, he stopped short that a somber shape lay sprawled on the sand, lapped by the gentle tide. Curiosity, sharper than any hook, compelled him forward. That it was a corpse, swollen and pallid, draped in the ragged remains of what might have once been fine linen. The features were masked by weed and grit, but Mateo recognized the indelible azure stain of a tattoo on the forearm, a skull engulfed in flames, impaled by a roughly rendered cutlass that he knew that emblem. He'd seen it reproduced on one of his grandfather's brittle charts, a symbol denoting Bartolomeo's inner circle. A shiver, deeper than the ocean's chill, traced its way down his spine. He prodded the cadaver with his toe, rigid, long gone. Mateo wrestled the body higher up the beach, beyond the water's reach. He had to report this to the Capitan del Puerto. This was more than just a drowned soul, this was altogether different. Disturbing. By the time he reached Cartagena, the news had already raced ahead. The fishermen, always eager to trade tales alongside their daily catch, were abuzz with conjecture. The discovery, coupled with the distinctive tattoo, had rekindled the fading embers of the Bartolomeo myth. He found Capitan Rodrigo Vargas, a distant relative, in his office overlooking the harbor. The Capitan, a corpulent man perpetually creased with concern, listened intently as Mateo recounted his discovery, his expression growing steadily more grave. Bartolomeo's mark, you're certain? He inquired, his voice a low rumble. Mateo affirmed with a nod, the image of the burning skull branded into his mind. This is troubling, Mateo, very troubling. The Capitan began to pace, his weighty boots echoing on the floorboards. There have been murmurs, unsettling occurrences out at sea. Fishermen have reported strange lights, irregular currents, things defying explanation. Mateo scoffed, superstition, Capitan. They're seeing shadows and phantoms. Perhaps, the Capitan conceded, his gaze trained on the distant horizon, but we cannot simply ignore it. We will investigate, secure the body, alert the authorities. That evening, Mateo found himself at La Taberna de la Serpiente, the dimly lit den near the docks. The air hung thick with the mingled scents of stale beer and unwashed bodies, the low thrum of conversation barely audible above the mournful strumming of a guitar. He sought out old Miguel, a wizened mariner who claimed to recall stories handed down from his own grandfather, a man said to have sailed alongside Bartolomeo. Miguel sat slumped over a tankard, his eyes clouded with age and drink. So, the sea yields another, does she? He rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across stone. Bartolomeo's signature. I warned you, boy. I warned you he'd return. Mateo rolled his eyes. It's just a corpse, Miguel, likely some hapless pirate swept ashore from a sunken ship. Shipwreck? Miguel cackled, a brittle, hollow sound. No, Mateo, this is more than mere misfortune, this is a portent. Bartolomeo stirs. He's returning for what he considers his. Around them, the other patrons grew restless, their conversations faltering, the whispers intensified, swirling around the tavern like an incoming tide. Bartolomeo, the name lingered, heavy with dread and expectation. A rough voice shattered the hushed atmosphere. It was Ramon, a brawny fisherman known for his blunt practicality. Enough of this drivel, Bartolomeo is long dead, has been for generations, this is just a chance occurrence. Is it, Ramon? Miguel challenged, his aged eyes sharp. Or is it the sea reminding us that certain debts can never truly be settled? He tapped his tankard, the sound resonating in the sudden hush. Bartolomeo forged a compact with the sea that he pledged her riches beyond imagining. And when he suffered betrayal, the sea did not forget. Matteo felt a sliver of disquiet that he wanted to dismiss it as drunken prattle, but the expressions etched on the surrounding faces spoke volumes. Fear, palpable and primal, saturated the air that he quit the tavern, Bartolomeo's whispers pursuing him through the twisting, cobbled lanes. The moon reigned high, painting the world in elongated, distorted shadows. The sea, typically a source of tranquility, now felt malevolent, a murky and unfathomable void concealing secrets best left submerged. That he recalled his grandfather, hunched over his maps, his eyes burning with feverish hope. Had the old man intuited something he had not? Was there substance to the legend beyond a bedtime fable? Reaching his modest shack overlooking the bay, he glanced out at the water. A dense fog was creeping in, blanketing the horizon, devouring the stars. That he couldn't dispel the feeling that something approached, something sinister and vile. And that bloody Bartolomeo, whether spectre or mortal, lay at the heart of it. All shadows on the horizon. The salt spray stung Matteo's face, more acrid than usual. He squinted towards the shrouded horizon, the air thick and stagnant, holding a preternatural stillness that unsettled him. The dawn, usually a riot of tropical colors, was muted, swallowed by a low-hanging, leaden sky. Even the sea, normally a shimmering expanse of turquoise, was a dull, slick gray. A knot tightened in his stomach as he gripped the net. He'd felt this premonitory shiver before, a harbinger of storms, but this was different. Imbued with a sense of being watched, then the fog descended, not a soft caress of mist, but a ravenous cloud that devoured the city whole. One moment, the fortress of San Felipe de Barajas stood silhouetted against the gloom. The next, it had vanished into the swirling opacity. A glacial chill permeated the air, pricking his skin. The sounds of Cartagena, vendors' calls, the rumble of carts, children's laughter, were not merely softened, but actively suppressed, as if the fog possessed a silencing power. Matteo cursed under his breath. This smothering fog always evoked feelings of isolation, a raw vulnerability, and the unwelcome sensation of unseen things lurking just beyond perception. The harbor's promise of safety beckoned, yet the unrelenting demand to feed his family was a stronger current, pulling him further from shore. He continued to row. The squeal of the oarlocks now the sole sound save for the foghorn's dirge-like cry from afar. Visibility was almost non-existent. He could scarcely discern the prow of his own skiff. He strained, listening for any hint of another vessel, any proof against the unnerving loneliness. Then he spied it. A blot against the fog, a deeper darkness resolving itself from the grey. At first, he dismissed it as trickery, a phantom born of the oppressive atmosphere. Yet, as it drew nearer, the shape sharpened, taking form as a ship. A ship unlike any he had ever witnessed. Its sails were jet, the color of starless night, catching a wind that didn't seem to exist on the sea. The hull was made of a dark, aged wood, bearing the scars of countless voyages. However, it was the flag that speared a shard of ice directly into his soul, the stark white skull and crossbones against the black sail, that symbol of death and piracy that had haunted these waters for generations. A pirate vessel, tales, legends, hushed stories of Bartolomeo and his damned crew. They surged back, overpowering his skepticism. He'd scoffed at them as the yarns of old men and superstitious women, but faced with this impossible spectre, doubt began to erode the bedrock of his reason. His heart hammered like a trapped bird. He yearned to pivot, to flee this horrifying apparition, yet his muscles felt leaden, unresponsive. He was petrified, caught like prey in the shadow of the skull and crossbones. The ship emerged from the fog's embrace, sailing with a supernatural silence and an ominous grace. Shadowy figures moved on deck, their purpose radiating a primal dread. One towered above the rest, his shape indistinct but radiating an undeniable aura of sinister authority. A film of cold sweat slicked Matteo's brow. This was no ordinary vessel, no mere pirates. This was something other, something ancient, malevolent, an entity that had no place in the sunlit world. His voice emerged at last, a croaking whisper, lost in the swirling fog. Dios mío, he breathed, the phrase half prayer, half curse. The ship pressed on, cleaving the fog like a blade. The temperature plummeted. The silence deepened. Matteo knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that his life had been irrevocably altered. The legends were true, Bartolomeo had returned, and Cartagena was about to settle a debt in blood. The burden of betrayal. Abuelo, Matteo began, his words a fragile thread against the storm's rising howl. That ship Bartolomeo's pennant, it's just folklore, isn't it, a spine-chilling yarn spun to keep kids close to home. Raphael, lost in contemplation of the swirling mist, pivoted, his face a tableau of accumulated years. The lantern's glow danced, stretching the worry lines bracketing his eyes into deep ravines. Fables often cradle a nugget of truth, Matteo, sometimes, far more than that. Matteo snorted, raking his fingers through his soaked hair. Truth, you're suggesting a pirate, moldering in his grave for centuries, is cruising our coastline, sowing chaos. Give me a break, abuelo, there has to be a rational explanation. Raphael exhaled, the sound like brittle reeds rasping in the wind. He ushered Matteo toward the snug, cluttered interior of their seaside dwelling. The air hung heavy with brine and the scent of aged timber. He motioned for Matteo to take a seat, then lowered himself gingerly into his time-worn rocker. You deem me addled, perhaps? Raphael murmured, his voice hushed. Just the ramblings of a dotard? No, abuelo, Matteo responded swiftly, but you crave logic, something digestible, something that fits neatly into your established worldview. Raphael leaned in, his eyes blazing with a fervor that unsettled Matteo. The world is seldom as it appears, Matteo, particularly not here, in Cartagena, this city. It breathes with the ghosts of the past. A past steeped in darkness. He paused, gathering his thoughts like scattered shells, his gaze drifting to the crucifix gracing the wall. Our lineage, we are more than simple fishermen, Matteo. We are custodians, weighed down by a legacy. Matteo furrowed his brow. Custodians, of what legacy? Raphael's eyelids fluttered shut, his lips forming silent invocations. When his eyes reopened, they locked onto Matteo, filled with a haunting blend of apprehension and determination. We are the scions of those who wronged Bartolomeo. The word settled like a shroud. Matteo stared, disbelief grappling with a growing sense of foreboding. Wronged him, you mean? The legend is factual, about the buried riches? The treasure is real, Raphael affirmed, his voice a mere breath. And so is the treachery. He unfolded the tale, his voice a low, mournful hum, of how their forefathers had been members of Bartolomeo's own crew. Consumed by avarice and unnerved by the pirates' escalating instability, they had conspired to purloin his hoard and deliver him to the Spanish authorities. They prevailed, Raphael pressed on, but Bartolomeo swore vengeance. He laid a curse upon them, their kin, all their progeny. He vowed to return and reclaim what had been stolen. Matteo listened, his mind in turmoil. The stories of his youth, dismissed as elaborate fantasies, now morphed into something sinister and real. He conjured up the Iglesia de San Pedro Claver, its imposing facade dominating the Plaza de Bolivar. He had often lingered on its steps, observing the ebb and flow of tourists, never imagining the secrets it concealed. The treasure, Raphael interjected, piercing Matteo's reverie, lies hidden beneath the Iglesia. In a vault constructed by the Jesuits themselves, long before Bartolomeo ever landed in Cartagena. He detailed how their ancestors, tormented by guilt and haunted by the prospect of Bartolomeo's return, had confessed their perfidy to the priests. The Jesuits, in exchange for the treasure's location, consented to conceal it and entrust the family with its guardianship, ensuring its clandestine existence until Bartolomeo's curse faded into myth. Our charge, Matteo, is to ensure he never recovers it. Raphael's tone wavered. We must safeguard it, shield Cartagena, from the encroaching darkness he embodies. Matteo surged to his feet, traversing the confines of the room. This is utter madness, abuelo, a pirate's curse, buried loot. I'm a fisherman, not an adventurer. I know nothing of protecting ancient secrets. You will learn, Raphael countered, his voice unwavering. You must. The mantle now falls to you. I am too frail, too far gone. You are the last. Matteo ceased his pacing, his gaze riveted on his grandfather. He saw the weight of generations mirrored in Raphael's eyes, the burden of betrayal etched into his very being. He saw not just a wizened man, but a sentinel, a protector, relinquishing a responsibility he never sought. He swallowed hard, the tang of salt and dread coating his palate. What must I do? He questioned, his voice barely audible. The fog outside seemed to tighten its grip, the spectral ship of figment lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The stain of betrayal had trickled down, and Matteo, the pragmatic fisherman, was now its unwilling inheritor. Bloody retribution. The Spanish galleon, Santa Clara, cleaved through the Boca Grande Channel, her sails full and white, resembling proud thunderheads against the cerulean expanse. Cartagena's fortifications loomed, promising respite after the grueling journey from Cadiz. Above deck, sailors' work songs mingled with the cries of gulls, a deceptive counterpoint to the anxiety simmering among those below. The Santa Clara bore a treasure far beyond mere trade goods, a king's ransom in silver bullion destined for the royal coffers, a secret whispered beyond the captain's cabin. An unseasonal miasma clung to the coast, a ghostly shroud that muted Cartagena's vibrant hues, lending the city an unsettling air. Oblivious, the Santa Clara pressed onward. From the fog's heart, a shadow took form. Unlike any vessel seen in these waters for a generation, it was a predator, sleek, black-hulled, and moving with lethal purpose. The Revenant, flying the skull and bones, had returned from the abyss. Upon the Revenant's quarterdeck stood bloody Bartolomeo, his face a roadmap of salt and struggle, etched with implacable resolve. The wind, relentless as the man, clawed at his grizzled, ink-dark hair. One eye, a glacial shard, remained after a Spanish blade claimed the other. Beside him, Silas the silent Blackwood stood, a monolith of menace. A tapestry of scars adorned his face, his expression unreadable as his hand tightened on his cutlass. Prepare to engage, Bartolomeo croaked, his voice roughened by brine and rotgut. A skeletal finger, scarred and knotted, jabbed towards the unsuspecting galleon. No mercy, reclaim what is rightfully ours. A savage cheer ripped from the Revenant's throat, a chorus of fervent anticipation. Cannons were run out, blades honed, and grappling irons made ready. The assault commenced without warning, a tempest of steel and fury. The Revenant surged forward, outstripping the Santa Clara's stately progress. The initial cannonade tore gaping wounds in the galleon's flank, unleashing a rain of splintered timber and anguished cries. Caught unawares, the Santa Clara's riposte was ragged and misdirected. Bartolomeo, a maestro of naval combat, had orchestrated the ambush with chilling precision, exploiting the fog and the element of surprise. Grappling hooks, like iron vipers, arched across the widening chasm, snaring the Santa Clara's rigging. With a concerted heave, Bartolomeo's privateers poured onto the deck, their cutlasses gleaming with dark promise. Silas the silent spearheaded the onslaught, a destructive whirlwind of steel. He moved with grim efficiency, his blade a silver flash against the chaos, dismissing any opposition. The Santa Clara's deck dissolved into a charnel house. Spanish sailors, unprepared for such overwhelming force, fought with valor, but were swiftly butchered. Bartolomeo, his cutlass slick with gore, stalked through the melee, a harbinger of doom. Age could not dim his speed or accuracy, each blow perfectly placed. The death throes of men mingled with the clangor of weapons and the thunder of ordnance. The air grew thick with the acrid tang of gunpowder and the metallic scent of spilled life. Within an hour, the struggle ebbed. The Santa Clara, her plank stained crimson, belonged to Bartolomeo. As the setting sun painted the ravaged deck in shades of blood orange and bruised purple, Bartolomeo took stock of the spoils that he possessed. The Santa Clara, and her valuable contents. Yet, a hunger remained. This victory was merely the opening salvo. News of the audacious attack spread through Cartagena like a fever dream. Panic seized the citizenry. The legend of Bartolomeo, relegated to fireside tales, had become a brutal fact. The sea, it seemed, had vomited up a vengeful spirit. The city guard doubled their vigilance, and the church bells pealed a mournful knell. Cartagena girded itself for the inevitable storm, the arrival of bloody Bartolomeo presaging an era of unrelenting terror. Echoes of terror. The salt-laced wind carried more than the scent of the sea now, it carried whispers of dread. Cartagena, once a jewel gleaming under the Caribbean sun, was tarnished with fear. The brazen attack on the Santa Clara had ripped through the city's confidence like a cannonball through sailcloth. Now, every creak of a ship, every shadow in the narrow, cobbled streets, held the potential for terror. Mateo felt it too, a cold knot in his stomach that tightened with each passing day. The docks, usually bustling with merchants and sailors, were subdued. Men spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously towards the horizon. The governor had doubled the city guard, but even the sight of soldiers marching through the Plaza de Bolivar did little to quell the rising panic. The first body was found washed ashore near Boca Grande, tangled in seaweed and bearing a gruesome brand, a skull with crossed swords. burned deep into the flesh of his shoulder. It was old Tomas, the baker, a man known for his gentle nature and even gentler bread. Matteo knew Tomas, had often bought pan de bono from his stall. Now, he was just another victim. Then came Isabella, the seamstress. Discovered lifeless in her shop, a crude pirate cutlass lying beside her, the same brand marked her skin. The whispers turned to screams. The pirates weren't just after treasure, they were hunting. Matteo tried to dismiss it as coincidence, as the work of ordinary cutthroats capitalizing on the fear Bartolomeo's legend had resurrected, but the brand that was no ordinary mark. It was a symbol of vengeance, a chilling reminder of the past. That he found the message near the docks, scrawled in charcoal on the whitewashed wall of a warehouse: the blood debt must be paid, the silver will be returned. It was crude, almost childlike in its execution, yet it radiated a palpable sense of menace. Matteo traced the letters with his calloused finger, a shiver running down his spine. The words felt like a personal threat, a whisper in the darkness meant only for him. That night, sleep offered no escape. Nightmares plagued him, visions of skeletal figures rising from the sea, their eyes burning with ghostly fire. He saw Bartolomeo, his face a grotesque mask of decay, his voice a rasping whisper promising retribution. He awoke in a cold sweat, the scent of brine and decay clinging to him. He rose before dawn, unable to bear the confines of his small house. He walked towards the beach, the sand cold and damp beneath his bare feet. The sea was a churning mass of grey, mirroring the turmoil within him. As the first rays of light pierced the horizon, he saw something glinting in the sand. It was a small, silver coin, half buried near the water's edge. He picked it up, turning it over in his hand. It was Spanish, but older, bearing the mark of a long-dead king, and etched into its surface, almost too small to see, was the same skull and crossed swords. Matteo threw the coin into the sea, as if casting away a piece of his own soul. He knew then, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was more than just piracy, this was a reckoning. Bartolomeo had returned, and Cartagena, steeped in the sins of the past, was about to pay the price. And somehow, Matteo knew, he was caught in the crosshairs. See rituals and dark omens. The thick Cartagena air, heavy with brine and unseen moisture, pressed against Matteo's skin, concealed behind a screen of gnarled mangroves. The tang of salt assaulted his senses. A bonfire blazed on the beach below, a narrow crescent curving away from Boca Grande. Its flickering light painted the sand with grotesque, animated shadows. A low, rhythmic drone thrummed through the night. Bartolomeo's men. He'd stalked them from the moment their longboat, a dark phantom, ghosted into the bay. A knot of apprehension tightened with his curiosity, an urge he could no longer suppress. The branded coin nestled in his pocket radiated a feverish warmth. A ragged assembly of seafarers, etched with scars and clad in tattered garb, swayed around the fire. At their core stood Silas, the silent Blackwood, a mountain of a man whose eyes devoured the flames, leaving only chilling emptiness. He raised a roughly hewn idol of driftwood, its face a mask of silent, eternal anguish. Blackwood's voice, a guttural vibration that shook Matteo's very core, initiated the chant. The crew echoed him, their discordant voices a cacophony of forgotten deities and age-old, ravenous rites. They flung handfuls of sea salt into the inferno, which responded with angry snaps and hisses. Then came the offering point. 2 burly pirates wrestled a bleeding goat towards the blaze. The sound died abruptly as Blackwood, with unsettling efficiency, buried a cruel, curved blade in its throat. A thick, viscous tide of blood spilled onto the sand, leaving a dark stain. Matteo's gorge rose. He was no stranger to the slaughter of animals, it was a harsh reality of existence. This, however, was different. This was a sacrifice, a supplication to something ancient and wicked. Blackwood gathered the goat's blood in a crude wooden bowl and, with a theatrical gesture, hurled it into the ocean. The waves, usually whispering against the shore, surged forward with renewed aggression, as if answering a summons. Then, an act of greater disquiet. A length of stout rope, intricately knotted with strange symbols, was produced. They hauled it to the water's edge and slowly, deliberately, immersed it in the surf. Hauling it back ashore, they commenced tightening each knot, repeating the action with each iteration of their unsettling mantra. As the ritual intensified, fog billowed in from the sea, a dense, impenetrable shroud. It swirled around the pirates, briefly revealing then concealing them, like specters summoned from the depths of the ocean. The very atmosphere thickened, pregnant with dread. An icy premonition gripped Matteo's heart. A rogue wave, larger and more forceful than any before, crashed onto the beach, carrying with it a dark, amorphous mass. The pirates erupted in a chorus of feverish celebration. As the water retreated, it revealed a jumble of seaweed, driftwood, and a human skull, old and bleached by sun and tides. The skull held Mateo's gaze. A silver filling, gleaming with unnatural brilliance in the firelight, marked one of its teeth, the same silver mine from the ancient Spanish veins. Blackwood claimed the skull, cradling it as if it were a priceless gem. He turned towards the sea, his voice reaching a fevered pitch. "Show us, reveal the path, the silver demands its return." With a sickening lurch of understanding, Mateo grasped the truth. This wasn't merely about stolen treasure, this was fueled by vengeance. Bartolomeo didn't just seek to reclaim a lost fortune, he yearned to punish past treachery, and to exact retribution from their descendants. The ritual, the skull, the silver, all pieces of a grim mosaic. A menacing shadow stretching from the grave. He knew, with chilling certainty. The legend was not a mere fireside tale spun by old men. It was real. Bartolomeo was real, and he was coming for Mateo. The sea, once a reassuring friend, now felt like a vast, unknowable adversary, concealing dark secrets and ancient resentments. The silver, once a symbol of prosperity, now embodied a bloody vendetta. He must warn his family. He had to find a way to thwart Bartolomeo, before the pirates' wrath consumed them entirely. A guardian's choice. The air, thick with the stench of low tide and decaying vegetation, clung to him. Mateo scrubbed at his skin, desperate to shed the image of Silas Blackwood and that leering skull, but the vision persisted. Bartolomeo. A name dismissed as old wives' tales and dockside dives had transformed into a tempest gathering offshore, set to break upon his head. He found Abuelo Rafael on the veranda, patiently weaving a rent in his net. The needle's crisp snick seemed a conscious rejection of the unease pervading the atmosphere. Mateo settled beside him, the ensuing quiet strained and heavy. "You knew," Mateo began, his voice a low rasp. "About Bartolomeo, everything." Rafael exhaled, a sound like a punctured bellows deflating. "Some histories sleep best undisturbed, Mateo. The past has claws. Claws sunk deep into our present." Mateo's fists clenched. "Blackwood. He's reviving him, seeking vengeance, driven by the silver." Raphael's hands froze. He turned, his gaze upon Mateo holding the accumulated sadness of centuries. The silver was a parley. A guarantee of passage, shattered like cheap glass. So what? We cower and wait to become another notch on his belt. Mateo rose, restless energy coursing through him. "Surely, there's a stand we can take." Raphael surveyed the incandescent sea as the sun began its fiery plunge. "There's a lineage of survival here, Mateo. A reason that treasure has remained untouched. Because we're good at hiding it. Because we safeguard it. It's transcended avarice, Mijo. It's about preventing Bartolomeo from corrupting this land with his spite." Raphael pushed himself up, his motions deliberate, if slow. "That burden now falls to you." Mateo scoffed. "Me, I'm a simple fisherman, Abuelo, not some swashbuckling hero." "You are Vargas-born," Raphael countered, resolve sharpening his voice. "And possess a speed and strength that eluded me. I'll impart what I know. That's all I can offer." The initiation began with the dawn. Under a blazing sun, Raphael, surprisingly spry, tutored Mateo in the raw, visceral fighting style bequeathed through generations. It was a savage ballet of blade clashes and parries, preying on vulnerabilities and using the terrain. The mangrove swamp became their amphitheater, its labyrinth of roots and slick banks a grueling proving ground. "Become the wave, Mateo." Raphael rasped, his voice gravelly. "Navigate the obstacle, then crash upon it with relentless power." Mateo, initially awkward and hesitant, gradually found his rhythm. The cutlass in his grasp, the dagger sheathed at his thigh, felt less alien, more inherent. He learned to anticipate Raphael's feints, to discern the nuances of his weight shift, the subtle twitch of his wrist. The treasure itself was another story. Forget chests brimming with gold, it lay secreted beneath the ruins of the Jesuit church, now engulfed in vines, in a warren of tunnels known only to the Vargas kin. Raphael revealed the concealed entrances, the deceptive facades, the lethal contraptions set long ago. "Bartolomeo will know where to probe," Raphael cautioned, his words echoing within the damp passages. He knows this city as well as his own black heart that we must prepare. They devoted their days to honing edges, fortifying traps, and devising their defense. Matteo crafted rudimentary explosives from gunpowder and fired clay, learning to utilize the tunnels as his ally. A somber resolve settled over him, a clarity of purpose he had never experienced before. He was no longer just a fisherman, he was a sentinel. That evening, bathed in the sun's lurid farewell, Matteo stood on the shore, the cutlass mirroring the dying light. On the breeze came the familiar tang of the sea, mingled with something acrid, something primordial. He could almost sense Bartolomeo's presence, a spectral chill against his nape. Tightening his hold on the cutlass, his gaze swept the horizon. He was ready, the price of loyalty. The salt spray stung Matteo's face as he hauled in the net, the pre-dawn darkness clinging to the horizon. He could almost taste the coming storm, a metallic tang on the wind that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Isa was late. She usually met him before sunrise to help sort the catch. He chided himself for worrying. She was probably just sleeping in. A blood-curdling scream shattered the morning stillness. It came from the direction of Isa's house near the docks. Matteo dropped the net, his heart hammering against his ribs. He sprinted towards the shore, the image of Isa's laughing face fueling his desperate run. He arrived to chaos. The Rodriguez's small cottage was in disarray, the door splintered. His eyes widened when he saw the unmistakable emblem seared into the wooden doorframe, a skull wreathed in seaweed, Bartolomeo's mark. Fear turned to ice in his veins. This wasn't some drunken brawl. This was a deliberate act. Old man Rodriguez lay slumped against a overturned table, dazed but alive. They took her, he croaked, pointing a trembling finger towards the harbor. Bartolomeo. They took Isa. Matteo's breath hitched. He knew Bartolomeo's return meant trouble, but he hadn't imagined this. He knelt, checking Rodriguez for serious injuries, finding only bruises and a gash on his forehead. "Stay here," Matteo said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll get her back." He found Raphael at the church, already saddling a horse. The old man's face was grim. "He wants the treasure, Matteo. He knows we hold the key." "But Isa." Matteo began, the words choked with emotion. Raphael placed a calloused hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Bartolomeo will use her. He always prized leverage above all else. We have to be smart." News came with the midday sun. A blackened rowboat, adrift in the bay, carried a single message, a crudely drawn map of Cartagena, with a circle around the Vargas family crypt, and a single word scrawled beneath it in blood: location. Tied to the map was Isa's scarf, the one she always wore when the sea breeze turned sharp. Matteo stared at the map, the weight of the decision crushing him. Give Bartolomeo the location, and condemn the city to his wrath; refuse, and condemn Isa to a fate he couldn't even bear to imagine. "He won't just take the treasure," Raphael said, his voice low. "He'll desecrate it. He'll use it to fuel his power, corrupting everything it touches." Matteo knew his grandfather was right, but looking at Isa's scarf, stained a sickening crimson, he couldn't reconcile the greater good with the immediate, agonizing reality. He spent the afternoon in a tormented haze, pacing the beach, the rhythmic crash of the waves mocking his indecision. He pictured Isa, her fiery spirit, her unwavering loyalty. He couldn't betray her. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the sand, Matteo made his decision. "I have a plan," he announced to Raphael, his voice surprisingly steady. "We go to him." Raphael raised an eyebrow. "Madness. He'll kill you both." "Not if we're clever," Matteo countered. "We know Bartolomeo. He's arrogant. He thinks he has all the advantages. We use that against him." Their plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. They would use the storm brewing on the horizon as cover. Raphael, with his knowledge of the sea and its currents, would navigate them close to Bartolomeo's ship, the sea serpent. Matteo would use his smaller fishing boat to slip past the larger vessel's defenses, relying on his agility and familiarity with the local waters. Their only weapon, besides their wits, was a small pouch of polvo de sueño, a potent sleeping powder Raphael had learned to brew from the native tribes. That night, under the cloak of a sky heavy with impending rain, Matteo and Raphael set sail. The sea serpent loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the churning waves, a testament to Bartolomeo's enduring malice and the agonizing price of loyalty. Matteo gripped the worn wooden helm, the taste of salt and fear mingling on his tongue. He was sailing into the heart of the storm, both literal and metaphorical, driven by a desperate hope and the unwavering belief that he could save Isa, even if it meant sacrificing everything, into the serpent's lair. Driven rain blurred the monstrous silhouette of La Serpiente, Bartolomeo's ship a jagged tooth against a sky consumed by the tempest. Raphael, unflinching, wrestled their small skiff through the churning waves, his experienced hands a steady counterpoint to the storm's fury. The potent sleeping powder rested snug against Matteo's side, alongside a slim, unforgiving blade, the only weapon he dared carry, remember. Raphael bellowed above the gale, his words tight with anxiety. Bartolomeo first, Isa. Safe, then, come home. Matteo's answering nod was lost to the storm, his heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, fear coiled within him, a frigid serpent, yet the haunting image of Isa's terrified gaze propelled him onward. He was no hero, merely a fisherman, but he'd sooner face hell itself than abandon her to Bartolomeo's cruelty. Brutal waves hammered their small vessel against the Serpiente's immense hull. A sudden swell lifted Matteo within reach of a dangling rope ladder. He seized it, scrambling upward, the coarse fibers scraping his palms raw. Raphael offered a swift, silent salute before turning back toward the distant lights of Cartagena. Shadows swallowed Matteo as he landed on the deck. The tempest magnified every timber's groan, every aquatic impact against the ship's flanks. Overhead, the rigging keened a mournful lament that he flattened himself against the mainmast, his vision straining to pierce the gloom. The deck was eerily empty. The crew, no doubt, sought refuge below. A stroke of luck. He moved with a hunter's grace, his bare feet soundless on the rain-slicked planks. He recalled the ship's layout from Raphael's ancient charts, relics from Matteo's cartographer grandfather. Bartolomeo's opulent quarters would lie aft, beneath the jutting captain's gallery. He stole down the narrow passage toward the stern, the reek of brine and old beer hung heavy in the air. A lone lantern cast macabre shapes that danced on the walls, playing tricks on his perception. He half expected to see phantasmal figures flitting in the periphery, echoes of Bartolomeo's past sins. A gravelly voice ripped through the oppressive quiet. What in God's name was that? Matteo froze, his spine pressed against the damp wood. Heavy footfalls echoed closer. He lunged into a cramped alcove, scarcely large enough to conceal him. The footsteps drew near, halting directly outside his hiding place. Just the wind playin' tricks, I figure, another voice rumbled, closer still. This blow's got everyone jumpy as a cat. Matteo held his breath, every muscle a taut spring. He heard the men mutter as they moved on, their heavy tread fading into the storm's symphony. He waited, suspended in silence, then slipped back into the passage. He stood before the door to Bartolomeo's lair, solid oak reinforced with brutal iron bands. No window, no glimpse of what lay beyond. He pressed an ear to the wood, listening intently. The muffled drone of voices drifted from within, their words indecipherable, drawing a deep, steadying breath. Matteo unsheathed his knife and slid the slim blade into the lock. Lockpicking was a skill gleaned from the harsh streets of Cartagena, a relic of a past he'd hoped to bury. The tumblers clicked softly, surrendering one by one, until the mechanism yielded with a faint, almost imperceptible snap. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the handle. This was the precipice. No turning back now. He pushed the door inward and stepped into the serpent's den, the weight of the past. The air in Bartolomeo's cabin reeked of saltpeter and stale rum. Charts cluttered the mahogany table, illuminated by a single swaying lantern that cast dancing shadows on the pirate captain's face. Bartolomeo, a mountain of a man with a beard braided with tarnished silver, turned slowly, his one good eye, the other lost to some forgotten battle, fixed on Matteo with unnerving intensity. The little fisherman, Bartolomeo rasped, his voice a gravelly echo from the depths of a long-dead soul. Come to bargain for your pretty bird, have you? Matteo stood his ground, the rocking of La Serpiente beneath his feet doing little to settle his nerves. He pulled the knife from his belt, the steel glinting in the dim light. I'm here for Isa, and for the gold you stole from my ancestors. Bartolomeo let out a booming laugh that shook the cabin. Ancestors, you reek of the sea, boy, but not of treachery. You think you know my history? He slammed a fist on the table, making the charts jump. You know nothing of betrayal. I know the Vargas family guarded that treasure, entrusted by the church, until you came along. I know they paid the price for it with their lives, branded as cowards. Matteo countered, his voice gaining strength. And I know that curse clinging to your gold is what keeps you chained to this world. Bartolomeo's laughter died in his throat that he studied Matteo, a flicker of something akin to recognition, passing across his face. The boy knows more than he should, he muttered, more to himself than to Matteo. You have the eyes of your grandfather, Diego, but none of his wisdom. Wisdom, he chose honor. A choice you clearly never understood. Matteo took a step forward, planting the knife in the table between the charts. Let Isa go, face me, the treasure, her freedom, the fate of Cartagena, we settle it all, here and now. A slow smile spread across Bartolomeo's face, a terrifying display of yellowed teeth. A duel, eh? I haven't had a proper fight in, longer than you've been alive. He drew his own cutlass, the blade wickedly curved and honed to a razor's edge. Very well, boy. Let's see if you have the stomach for blood. The fight began brutally. Bartolomeo, despite his size, moved with surprising agility, his cutlass a blur of steel. Matteo relied on his smaller size and agility, dodging and weaving, trying to anticipate the pirates' attacks. The cabin became a whirlwind of clashing steel, the air thick with the smell of sweat and ozone. Bartolomeo's attacks were relentless, each swing carrying the weight of centuries of rage. Matteo managed to parry a blow, the force sending a jolt up his arm. He saw an opening, a brief moment of hesitation in Bartolomeo's movements, and lunged, aiming for the pirate's unarmored side. Bartolomeo roared, deflecting the blow at the last second, and Matteo stumbled backward, nearly losing his footing. You fight with spirit, boy, I'll give you that, Bartolomeo growled, circling Matteo like a predator. But spirit isn't enough, you lack the killer's edge. Matteo knew he couldn't win this fight on strength alone. He needed to find another way. He thought back to the stories his grandmother told him, tales whispered in hushed tones around the fire, tales of the original betrayal, of Bartolomeo's first mate, Rodrigo, who'd led the mutiny. Rodrigo betrayed you, Matteo said, panting, choosing his words carefully. He took your treasure, your ship, your life, and you, bloody Bartolomeo, were too blind to see it coming. Bartolomeo froze, his cutlass dropping slightly. The confident swagger vanished, replaced by a flicker of pain. Don't speak his name, he hissed, his voice barely audible. Why not? Matteo pressed, seizing the advantage. Are you afraid to remember, afraid to admit that you were a fool, trusting the wrong man? The change in Bartolomeo was palpable. The rage in his one good eye was still there, but it was mixed with something else. Doubt, guilt, the weight of the past, it seemed, was a heavier burden than Matteo could have imagined. Bartolomeo roared, a sound of pure anguish, and charged, his attack wild and unfocused. Matteo, fueled by adrenaline and a newfound hope, sidestepped the blow and brought his knife up, aiming not for Bartolomeo's heart, but for his soul, redemption and revelations. Matteo pressed the steel of his blade against Bartolomeo's windpipe, the pirate captain's breath, harsh and ragged, ghosting across his knuckles. The turmoil in Bartolomeo's gaze, a vortex of fury and remorse, slowly ebbed, replaced by a glimmer of something akin to contrition. It ends here, Bartolomeo, Matteo rasped, his voice strained with fatigue and an unsettling twinge of compassion. Your fight is done. Bartolomeo offered no resistance, his gaze fixed on Matteo, a faint smile gracing his lips. Then finish it, grant me oblivion. Hesitation flickered through Matteo, vengeance beckoned, the echoes of generations urging him to stain the deck with pirate blood. Yet, something stayed his hand. He saw beyond the monster, glimpsing a man devoured by inner torment, a soul corroded by history. I won't, Matteo surprised himself by saying. Too much has been spilled. I refuse to become you. Disbelief sparked in Bartolomeo's widening eyes. Mercy, from Rodrigo's kin. Rodrigo was a traitor, Matteo stated, his tone unwavering. You suffered betrayal, but retribution offers no solace. It only begets further suffering. He lowered his blade. Let it cease now, help me break this cycle. A heavy silence descended, punctuated only by the ship's groans and the distant calls of gulls. Then, a hollow, fractured laugh erupted from Bartolomeo, echoing across the timbers. The cycle, you think this is about trinkets, boy, jewels? He swept his arm towards the Iglesia San Pedro claver, looming in the distance. The true prize, it lies not beneath the church's foundations that it is the church itself. Ignoring Mateo's watchful stance, he pushed himself to his feet. Come that I'll unveil what you've truly been battling. He hobbled toward the captain's quarters, Mateo shadowing him, his grip never far from his sword. Inside, Bartolomeo drew aside a tapestry depicting a placid St. Peter claver, revealing a hidden recess. From within, he extracted a stack of bound ledgers, their aged pages yellowed and fragile. This, Bartolomeo uttered, his voice thick with foreboding, is the real trove, the records, the admissions, the rolls of names, everything. Mateo accepted the documents, his fingers tracing the faded script that as he began to decipher the text, his eyes grew wider with each passing line. These weren't charts to buried bullion, but meticulous accounts of Bartolomeo's crew's piratical depravities, savage incursions, unspeakable barbarities, and, most damningly, a detailed chronicle of Rodrigo's treachery, orchestrated by influential figures within Cartagena's elite, familiar names, names whispered in the shadows of taverns, names of respected families. A furious bellow ripped through the air. He's lost his nerve, he's sparing the whelp. Bartolomeo's second-in-command, a massive brute by the name of Vargas, no relation to Mateo, filled the cabin doorway, his cutlass glistening with seawater. Behind him surged the crew, their faces twisted with animosity and avarice. The bounty is ours, Bartolomeo, we're done with your obsessive quest for vengeance. Fools! Bartolomeo roared, drawing his own weapon. You imagine you can control this? These papers will bring down everything, including you. Mateo knew what course to chart. That he stepped before Bartolomeo, raising his sword in defiance. These records belong to the people of Cartagena, the truth deserves to be revealed. The skirmish was swift, brutal, and desperate. Mateo and Bartolomeo, back to back, formed an unlikely coalition against the mutinous rabble. The confined space of the ship transformed into a blood-soaked arena, the air thick with the rasp of steel and the death cries of men, driven by the necessity to preserve the reality etched in those delicate pages. Mateo fought with a fervor he never knew he possessed. Bartolomeo, despite his wounds, wielded his cutlass with the ferocious spirit of an animal. At bay, from the shore, Abuelo Rafael, Padre Benicio, and a cluster of fishermen, drawn by the commotion, watched in mounting dread. Clutching his rosary, Raphael began to murmur ancient prayers, his voice swallowed by the clamor. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the revolt was subdued. Vargas lay lifeless at Mateo's feet, along with numerous other crewmates, their morale shattered. The surviving pirates capitulated, realizing their fate was sealed. Bartolomeo, leaning heavily on his blade, turned toward Mateo. What will you do with them? Justice will be served, Mateo said, his face somber. They will be held accountable for their transgressions. As dawn broke, smearing the heavens with streaks of copper and gold, Bartolomeo prepared to depart. His face, reflecting a blend of regret and resignation, was turned toward the Iglesia San Pedro claver. Perhaps redemption remains an option for me. Turning to Mateo, he offered a whisper of a smile. Thank you, boy, you showed me that even a pirate might find a different path to tread. He boarded a small skiff with a handful of loyal adherents and sailed off toward the horizon, vanishing into the rising sun. Mateo watched him depart, then turned his attention to the Iglesia. That he understood that the confrontation was far from concluded. The documents demanded protection, the truth, dissemination. There was a city to shield, a family to safeguard, and a destiny to embrace. That he entrusted the documents to Padre Benicio. These must be kept under guard, the truth must be unveiled. His face pale yet determined, Padre Benicio nodded. I will protect them, Mateo, with my very life. Mateo returned to the shore, where Abuelo Rafael awaited, his eyes brimming with a mixture of pride and solace. As Mateo embraced his grandfather, the burden of the past at last began to lift from his shoulders. That he was no longer just a fisherman. That he was a protector, a guardian, a lineage of pirates and priests, bound to the fate of Cartagena. That he was home.